So the question is, why is it important? Or yeah, so, I mean, originally, I mean, so Black Panther came out in 1966, and it was essentially it was a product of white imagination. Black Panther was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and they were two white guys who were wrestling with, again, the backdrop of the civil rights movement. What does that mean? Because at the time, the comic book industry was very white. And so they're wrestling with these social conscious issues. And Black Panther was one of the things that they came up with too, is like, hey, how can we push back against, what's going on? How are we wrestling with this in our art, frankly? And so it works at that level. But moving on, I mean, one of the reasons why, I think about the evolution of the character through the different hands of creatives that Black Panther and Wakanda have been in. And you can see that once Black Panther is turned over into the hands of Black creatives, it takes on a whole new meaning, a whole new level of, no, this is what it means to come from us. This is what the product of our imagination looks like. And when we start looking at an African kingdom through the lens of history, through the lens of, the history of oppression, and this history of plundering within the African continent. So you see all these different elements of, no, this means these are what we're wrestling with. And yet it's also aspirational. Yeah. It's also aspirational because there's an element of hope that runs through the entire Black Panther mythos. It's, hey, what could things have looked like without that history of oppression? It's, hey, how could culture and society look like if we developed it on our own terms? So there's a whole lot of aspirational aspects behind Wakanda and the Black Panther mythos.
I was going to say one other thing. I do a lot of stuff on social media. So we had this whole survey, and I'm going to ask you the question because, I have to take over being a professor and all. Would you rather live in Wakanda or Zamunda?
Wakanda.
And that's what everybody said.
Yeah.
They said you party in Zamunda,
yeah, exactly.
And you live in Wakanda because it's more technologically advanced.
Yes.
What was the second one?
Zamunda is from Coming to America. So it's a fictional African country with Eddie Murphy. And
now, I'm not going to lie, when the first Black Panther movie came out, and I saw it maybe, 3 times opening weekend, and the first 2 times I did dress up, but the first time I dressed up, I dressed up as a member of the delegation from the Zamunda Nation going to see Black Panther.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, I also, when I was researching, the books or the comic books and how they got started, Christopher Priest, which is one of the books that we read for this month, was the first Black comic book or graphic novel artist that they had. Because before then, like you said, it was mainly penned by white authors. And it didn't really take off until Christopher Priest wrote it, right?
Yeah, so Christopher Priest was the first Black writer to work at either Marvel or DC. He was the first one to work at Marvel and then went over to be the first one to work at DC. Okay. So it's him breaking grounds as a writer across both companies.
Okay. So I should preface this by saying that I don't read graphic novels as much. And so I thought it was really interesting that even with that, not having that background, that I could tell apart the 2 books, that I could tell apart some of the stylistic choices that they made between the 2. And it's telling because the Priest novel came out in 1998. That's when it started. And then The Coats was in 2016. And there were quite a few differences I noticed between the 2 and how much I enjoyed reading it. But I have a turn and talk question. And so I'll pose the question. You guys will have about 7-8 minutes to talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back and discuss it as a group. But the question I wanted to ask is, how did you find that the illustrations in both of the novels impacted the way that you absorbed the story, that you understood the story, and did you think that there were differences that you liked between one or the other more? So we'll give you guys about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I would never say anything. So the answers to the final exam are.
All right, so I should point out, if you guys want to go eat food, so you can go grab it.
Okay.
But we do memories of someone who's read more comic books than I have.
Me?
Me, yes. That you would probably be able to tell even more what the differences and were and why they were important. Because I think I can sort of, I was talking to him who's read a lot of comics, and he could already tell, like Coates, he was saying, has this sort of world that's already been made for us, so he can a little bit broader, like, intellectualize it without having to give constant like backdrop back the whole time.
Right. Yeah. So that, because he comes on after, I think it's after Priest run, General Hudlin takes it up next. I think Jonathan Mayberry does a little bit. I think by one of, but they're all building on Priest's legacy. So it's who I consider, and considering the time when it came out, I mean, I think that's also impacted the storytelling. Also in the.
Do you think that Priest was because he said he's worked in the industry quite a while, but he took on the Black Panther, right? Mm-hmm. Did his work before kind of he did in the Black Panther novels, or did he sort of recreate something completely?
Unrealizing it was him. So I collected a lot of the Jilly books when he was writing as Jim Owsley, and so I've been able to follow his writing career for a long time, actually. And so the technique he uses in Black Panthers, I think the first time it is in a comic book called Quantum and Woody, and then there was another comic book begins with a Z, Zero maybe, something like. But it's a storytelling style where he there's no linear storytelling. It's all jumping back and forth in time. There's always a series of flash, and that's a technique he employs in this opening series of his run on Black Panther.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot, and that was not his more recent change drastically from what he started with.
Yeah, and you can like he's become more like, and I think maybe was Black Panther the shift. Black Panther might have been the shift in his own personal storytelling style also in his journey, because all of a sudden his works become a lot more political.
Yeah.
They've always had this sort of satirical edge to them, but starting in Black Panther, now it's a lot more intentional social commentary. It's a lot more intentional involvement of politics and look at governments and things like that.
Yeah.
And definitely a critique of current events go on all throughout.
Yeah.
Starting, and I won't say starting with this, but I'm pretty sure it did start with Black Panther.
Okay. All right. So which one was your favorite between the two books?
I'm with Priest.
Yeah, I already knew that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think for me, the Ta-Nehisi Coates was interesting to read because given the little knowledge that I already had about the Black Panther world, mm-hmm. I was able to sort of read it more like a novel. Right. He didn't have to give me as much information, but I could appreciate sort of like the higher level stuff he was talking about. And his voice came through. Good. But the Christopher Priest was, I think, a lot more fun to read.
Right.
And that's, I think, what you want out of a comic book.
Yeah, because throughout Christopher Priest's run, he is drawing on the entire history of Black Panther and a lot of the history of comic books in general. And you can tell this is a guy who is steeped in comic book lore.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And now Ta-Nehisi, became familiar with. It actually came through his. I read like Between the World and Me. That was my introduction to him, and then through some of his fiction, because I read The Water Dancer, which was his fantasy novel. And so I was already familiar with him as a fiction writer, and so I've been really curious to see how his approach to comic books would be, especially coming from outside of the industry like he has.
Outside of what?
Outside of the comic book industry, because he did not grow up in the comic books industry, unlike Christopher Priest.
Yeah.
And you can tell some of those stylistic choices too, because he's very narrative driven, very all right. I have something to say. It's going to get said.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's also the difference in like the humor, for example, is, I mean, I don't think there was really any humor in the Coats, but that's sort of the basis of the Priest novel is like you get something humorous through at least a few of the characters, and that also there's a lot more characters, I felt like, because he was introducing and kind of setting up the foundation for Black Panther.
Well, one of the reasons he created I just feel like I'm just like, and now all of my nerdness is coming out.
Please.
But like, for example, we see the creation of Everett Ross, who we see in the movies. Well, he's a Christopher Priest creation. But the reason he created Everett Ross was he was just like, I'm going to write this very Black character from a very Black culture, and I don't want it to be labeled a Black book. And so I need an entry point for white readers to latch onto. And thus he created Everett Ross, who's, I think, based on, loosely based on one of the characters from Friends.
No way.
Chandler.
No way.
Yeah, so loosely based on him as the entry point to, for folks to latch onto, so they could,
interesting trivia.
Appreciate Black Panther from a different angle entirely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense actually, because that novel it's primarily told through his point of view, his lens, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of times when it gets confusing because it's his voice, but it's the story of Black Panther.
Right.
But it makes a lot of sense because he wrote it in 1998, and you need people to come out and read it.
Right.
Okay.
And keep in mind, Black Panther was a C or D list character at this point when they said, "Hey, Christopher Priest, why don't you write this character?" I mean, he was not one of the top tier characters at all.
Okay. So. I totally unrelated, but I was also reading something about they changed it to Black Leopard.
Oh, they changed it to what?
Black Leopard briefly, like after they introduced Black Panther.
Oh.
They changed it to Black Leopard because the Black Panther Party formed just a few months after they released that character.
Yeah, and I've blocked that out of my memory.
And that tanked.
Yeah, just like, nope, didn't happen. Okay. It's out there with like Blues Brothers 2000 and Star Trek 5, things that just never happened.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I'm glad because I don't think Black Leopard doesn't have the same ring to it as Black Panther anyway.
Right.
So, okay, cool. Carla.
Sure.
The difference between, you said there was a difference between we had Black creators versus white. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay.
At some point.
Okay.
And then I'll share my thought when the mics are on.
Okay.
Or are the mics always on? The answer to problem 2 is C.
Okay.
Oh, they're back? Oh, okay.
We're back on. Okay, so for people who've had a chance to discuss this, would you guys like to share something that you've talked about, something that you think is interesting? Yes, Jen.
We were just one big group. So first off, not all of us got to see both books, admitted. Second, we weren't sure how much of it was differences in the time period. So just like this is the, just like any movie or book or say like, oh, this is a very 90s feel to this particular art. But actually, what this gentleman pointed out that we thought was really interesting is in the 1998 one, it's mostly a white narrative of what's happening, which was kind of interesting. So we were wondering if that's kind of that whole thing of like society isn't quite ready. We've got a black hero, but we're not quite ready for it to be completely led. And now that we're more in the modern, we're kind of okay with it. Or if they did it on purpose of like, hey, so first off, he's incompetent, and here's this guy who's actually reading the show, but we just did it so we got published, but it's really this guy. Slash kind of that whole like, hey, most of Black history has been told by white people, so we're going to kind of show that in the comic. And then the newer comics seemed very just, it was mostly, you know, very, I hate to say it, but very Batman feel of just like dark, and he's dark and he fights, and it seems less about him versus the other one, where he's actually like doing some detective work and actually like going out and trying to figure things out. So that's kind of where our conversation went.
All right. Maurice, do you want to share what you told me about
I got you.
ever?
So when Christopher Priest, this was actually part of an experimental line Marvel had launched called Marvel Knights. And so when the editors approached Christopher Priest, they're like, hey, we want you to write Black Panther. At the time, Black Panther is like this C or D list level character. But the way Christopher Priest approaches it, because he's very conscious of who he is as a Black creative, and he's keenly aware of how the book could be perceived. He's like, oh, Black writer writing this Black character, it's going to be labeled a Black book, and therefore dismissed by a lot of the fans. And so his thinking was, I'm going to create this character, Everett Ross. And he based him off of, I was never a watcher of Friends, so I can't remember, is it Chandler Bing?
I can imagine that, Chandler.
Yeah, so he actually bases Everett off of Chandler Bing. And said, this is going to be the entry point for all of those white readers to go, okay, now we can latch onto this character. And so that's one thing. But the other thing he wanted to do using Everett Ross is the whole idea of like, Christopher Priest said, look, fundamentally, we have been doing Black Panther wrong. We've been treating him like he's just another guy in spandex fighting crime, and he is not. He's a king. Ooh, I like that. He's a king. And because he's a king, he has a different set of priorities. And so that's the thing. So it's like, Christopher Priest is just like, I don't think we appreciate just how different Black Panther is as a character. And him being a king is going to impact a lot of his decisions throughout his comic book history run. Like, why does he join the Avengers, for example? He was a longtime member of the Avengers. One that Christopher Priest runs it is because I didn't trust you all. You're a group of superpowered individuals who go into any country you want to fight whatever you've deemed the bad guy. That's an existential threat to my kingdom. I need to see what you're about. So I'm going to join your team and study it from the inside. So that's one of his different kind of motivations. But another thing that Everett Ross allows him to do is you now get to see, since you're looking at it through his eyes, well, Black Panther is now this enigmatic figure. You know, we see him at a remove, so we aren't in his head, right? So all we see is the mysterious guy who is always playing chess at all times, who's been trained since a little boy to always think 5, 6, 7 moves ahead of everybody else. And that's his training from the beginning. And so Black Panther now gets to be mysterious. He gets to flex his wealth. He gets to flex his technology. He is like Batman and Tony Stark all rolled into one, which is, again, what we haven't appreciated him as a character. We just see him as another guy in spandex. But no. He is the head of the most technologically advanced country on the planet. He has that entire country's wealth behind him. So between the technology and the wealth, that makes him one of the ultimate threats on the planet. At least that's the way governments are going to see him. And so now all of a sudden the politics start coming into play for how he's viewed also. So I'm going to stop now because I'm just...
So deep. You're so deep. I love it.
We'll have a Q&A at the end where you can just talk. Does anyone else have anything to add to this? Okay. So actually speaking about him being this ultimate superhero with so much power, he has these supernatural abilities, it seems, that are conferred to him via this herb that he takes, right, when he has to become king. And so just generally speaking, superheroes often have this inhuman, supernatural abilities, and they try to explain it with some sort of science in most of the comic books. But with Black Panther specifically, they do this really cool job especially in the Priest novel, where they explain the science behind some of the things, right? The most obvious example is the vibranium, which is the strongest metal, and they're able to make tools and weapons out of this. The one really fun thing that I thought was the part about the devil and how they figured out the physical circuitry to cut off his power, which is pretty amazing. And they succeeded for a little bit, and I just think like this, the marriage of the science and the supernatural that they talk about in the novels is really cool. And so, Dr. Berry, as an engineer and scientist, right? Just general question. You've seen the movies too, so I want to ask you, how realistic do you think the science that is portrayed is?
I think we'll get there. When I think about the movies, you know, even doing robotics, when I teach robotics to my students, they never think my robot is good enough because they use CGI and what they see in television and commercials as their standard. And I think we'll get there. I think we're close. I don't know if there's anything like vibranium that exists, but I think we'll get there. I actually have a question for you because you know I have this question. Help me understand the difference between the beads, the herb, and the vibranium. What is the relationship between those three?
The beads,
Yeah, the Okoye beads, is that what they call them?
no, the Komoyo
Oh
beads.
my God, you even got beads. Yeah, so that was the one thing I never totally understood. Are they all made from vibranium or?
No,
Okay,
no.
that's
And
what I want to know.
Man, y'all are making me, okay,
You can
nerd
nerd
flag
out.
is it's just gonna go,
Wave it, honey, wave it.
right? Like I said, training for this all my life, so okay. So no, vibranium is a special metal. It has a certain amount of properties, and the whole idea of marrying science and technology, I think, is actually crucial and brilliant at the same time, because sometimes you just need to magic wand wave things off as like, and now science, which
Yeah.
and the science and magic, you know, two very, you know, very close. So the vibranium has particular properties, and the majority of it's only found in Wakanda. And because of that, because of them having that ownership of that element, that allows them to do technology at a faster rate.
Right.
So the Komoyo in the Christopher Priest runs, I think he uses a Komoyo card, and then it eventually becomes the Komoyo beads. But that's a product of the technology.
Okay,
That's moving
I
up.
got you.
Right,
I got you.
and so
Okay.
but the heart-shaped herb is a product of being of biology growing too close to the vibranium mounds.
Okay.
So the vibranium mounds affects plant life and also animal life, though hasn't been extrapolated out as much, you know, there. But vibranium has this effect on these sort of things also. So you said vibranium, Komoyo beads, and the heart shape. All right, I did it. All
Yeah,
three.
that is wonderful.
That is so cool.
So that's my thoughts. I think we can get there, but not quite yet, but I love it. Yeah.
And so I guess a question for both of you guys, I guess we've already talked about this. What is the importance of having Wakandan technology, the way it's portrayed in both the novels and the movies? What do you think it means? What is the importance?
I think it's important for normalizing it, but another interesting thought I had, I don't know how many people saw the second movie, but this is something that my daughter brought up at the end of the first one, is that they seem to be moving towards, we're going to share vibranium with the world. And then at the beginning one, it seems like they went back on that. And I thought it was so interesting when Angela Bassett made the speech about a concern about vibranium. We have a concern about you and how you would use it. And I thought that was very interesting because that also brings, if we do get to the point with this technology, are we comfortable sharing it with the world? And so I thought that was really deep.
Yeah, and I took it as so vibranium for me has been a running allegory for wealth in Africa. And so what is the history of wealth in Africa? Well, it's there to be plundered, and different colonizing nations want to come in and have access and complete control over that resource.
Yeah.
And that's yet another reason why Wakanda is deemed as a threat, because they have this valuable resource that they aren't sharing. America doesn't get to control it. France in the movie does not get to control it, which makes Wakanda a threat. But it's all, like I said, I think it's all just a running allegory of, you know, how do we view African wealth? And that wealth takes the form of gold, it takes the form of minerals, and it takes the form of the people. I mean, all of that's the wealth that's been plundered.
Yeah.
Right. There is vibranium, but the people are the people who take that and do something with it, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they have the best scientists in the world, it seems, because
Which would-
they're able to use this metal and
Which
do
would
things
explain
with
the
it.
guy in the first one who was trying to take a claw.
Claw.
So here's my next question, because I'm learning too.
Go ahead.
So it was a meteorite that hit that caused the vibranium, correct?
Yeah, the vibranium was actually, it was a meteor that struck the Earth and landed there in Wakanda.
So is that what happened in the water too? Because where do water people come from? Did it hit in the water too?
Well, it's like with any meteor shower, there was one main meteor that hit, but then other pieces can fall off and land other places.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's good. And so then I'm thinking, because I don't be knowing nothing, is how does this relate to Superman and Kryptonite?
Don't do this. We're gonna pretend that didn't happen.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You can lead the Q&A.
Wrong universe.
I know, but the whole point. Okay, never mind. Forget it.
Go ahead.
Wasn't that from a meteorite or something too, though?
No. All right. Superman was the last survivor of the planet Krypton. Krypton exploded. Superman sent to Earth. Shards of Krypton then were propelled through the universe. Bits of it landed on Earth. That's what formed the different kinds of kryptonite.
Meteorite. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. So Marvel, DC, right? I'm sorry. His head's gonna explode. I'm sorry. I'll stop.
It's okay.
Next question, Jill.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Well, so the next question, I want to do another turn and talk. So this one is regarding the Dora Milaje. I think I'm saying that right? The female bodyguards,
Sounds
which
good.
in the Priest novel were introduced, and they kept getting every time. It was really interesting. And I think in the Coats, it's a very clearly very different portrayal of the bodyguards. And I think just generally the female characters have a different role in the Coats novel. And so my turn and talk question is, how is the portrayal of the Dora Milaje and the other female characters different between the two novels? And sort of a side question, if there are any comic book fans or Marvel fans, if you want to also discuss the portrayal of female characters in the Black Panther versus any other Marvel comics or movies. So we'll turn and talk for a few minutes again, and then we'll come back and discuss.
Okay, have at it. Yes, you can
Go
go.
get a nibble.
I'm pretty sure she's doing this on purpose. Okay.
Okay, yeah. I guess I'll give you my thoughts. I think I like the Coats representation more.
You like the
Coats, the Ta-Nehisi Coates, and the way he wrote the bodyguards. But I think it's because they are closer to the movies. And I think the movies were the first time I was introduced to them.
Right.
And the first time I saw them, I was like, these are really, really cool.
Mhm.
And the characters in general, the female characters in Black Panther, I think were done better than any other female characters I've seen in comic books. And their roles are also very unique. It's not like they are wives in training in the Priest novel, but at the same time, that's not the only thing they do, right? And even with the wives in training, it's not really. It's like a, what do you call it? It's just like a ceremonial thing, and it's not really what they do. And so I just generally think I liked both, but I liked the Coats' way of presenting the female characters a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so Christopher Priest, who created all of them, so they're 8 points for that. And so I know that he was originally thinking, tribal customs. How do we, because he was one who said Wakanda isn't one nation. It is made up of several different tribes within that nation. And so how do I keep these different people groups together? So thinking of Wakanda as a confederacy was another thing that Christopher Priest introduced. So now how do you keep all these different groups, allied? And one of the traditional ways was, sending their daughters to marry off into the royal family, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mixed thing. So fun fact, when I was writing the short story for this thing, I told the story through the lens, through the eyes of one of the characters that gets introduced after this series. Her name's Queen Divine Justice. She's a teenager from Chicago. Come to find out, she's in the line of the Dora Milaje. So she gets brought back to Wakanda. So I told the story through her eyes. And I talk about, I write it, wives in training, da da da. I tell the story that I tell, and then I send off the story. And so my notes from Marvel, one of the notes that came back from Marvel was, "Hey, I know we told you to stay with the comic book runs, but the wives in training thing, we are moving away from and just going to pretend wasn't a thing."
Interesting. Okay.
So.
Okay.
So that's been retconned. Despite what you read, it didn't happen.
Okay.
They've always been the way they've been portrayed in the movies.
All right. Cool. Interesting. All right. Well, I think even in the Priest novels, he kept clarifying. Well, never mind. I take it back. I think the language he used was a little bit different.
It was problematic all throughout.
Problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Was it karate, something chicks?
Which one?
He called them karate chicks.
Oh,
high school karate chicks, something like that, right?
Yes, that was the Everett Ross character who was a Christopher Priest mouthpiece, get away with all the jokes that he probably couldn't have made otherwise.
That's right. And they were younger, right? They were underage. Okay.
Right.
It's very problematic. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool. So I can understand why they would want to get away from it.
Right.
And also why they are very different in future representations.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what about the other female characters? Because you have read past just the books too,
right.
Or the novels that we read for today. How do you think the way that, I guess either, doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, even within the Christopher Priest run, like I said, the character I chose to write about was Queen Divine Justice, a young black teenager. We see him raising the Queen Mother, Ramonda, to being a central figure, which obviously she was in the, going on in the movies also. It hints towards the fact that, this nation is very matriarchal in nature, which a lot of kingdoms were at the time. The Dora Milaje were based on the Dahomey Amazons, I believe.
Yes, yeah, I read about that.
Right. So he's just doing this natural extension of what was going on in culture, and just raising the prominence. And so it's interesting that when you look at, say, Black Panther versus how women were portrayed in Black Panther versus every other superhero movie, and you see their prominence as scientists, their prominence as warriors, their prominence as leaders, and that hadn't been done in the cinematic universe at all.
No.
And then it kind of set the bar for how other movies, period, were going to be, which is why DC, who for the longest said, "Oh, we can't have a woman lead a movie," suddenly was like, "Oh, hey, about this Wonder Woman, yeah, well, we're gonna now we can do Wonder Woman all of a sudden."
Okay, so then what do you think about, because in the movies, I think they do a really great job of, and I've only seen the first Black Panther movie. I've seen, I guess, the others that have him in it and the Dora Milaje, but they portray them as I think they do a really good job of how they put them on the movie screen. I think I've seen things about how they choose to costume different superheroes, females, and how they're usually the way that they're dressed compared to the male counterparts, right? And stuff like that. And I think they did a really good job with the Dora Milaje, because
that's interesting, because none of their costumes or their battle armors, they're not done to the male gaze.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, right now it's on the screen, and they are. They are
practical outfits.
Functional. They are what warriors would wear, male or female.
Yeah.
And it's done with an understanding of they are warriors, not female warriors. They're just warriors, right? And I think that in the, I guess in the Priest novel, right, it's a little different. But do you think that Coates, the way that he changed, is that the right word for it? The way that he changed the role of the Dora Milaje, or at least the two characters in it,
Hang on, say that one more time.
said, do you think that the way that Coates changed, Ta-Nehisi Coates changed, I think, in my opinion, the Dora Milaje, like the two characters that are the rebels in the Coates novel,
Right.
that was a good choice.
Yeah, well, I think actually those characters were created in the run before Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think Jonathan Mayberry created Anika and the Midnight Angels during his run.
Okay.
Yeah. But you just see, but what you do see is this continual evolution of the Dora Milaje.
Okay.
And so you very much do see that.
So
Yeah.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is not the first one to portray them the way he did.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. 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 All right.
Yeah, Jonathan's really proud of the fact that they use his character and his Midnight Angels in the movie. So
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought it was very cool. I mean, I thought the story was very serious, but at the same time, it was a cool juxtaposition of what the characters meant in the Priest novel versus what they mean now.
Yeah.
And it was cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like even when we talk about, product of the male gaze or product of Black imagination, like when we see in the movie, we see the stunning costume work by Ruth Carter.
Uh-huh.
And so she's like, oh, no, I got you.
Yeah.
And that's a whole level of world building, which I really appreciate about the movies. And so I actually teach it in my world building classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, maybe we'll start coming back. Also, whatever you want to do, nerd out.
Okay.
We're good with that.
Okay. It is my expertise, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'll bring it to the table.
Totally. Yes. Okay, cool. Okay, everyone knows about DC.
Yes, please. My wife does that to me all the
I don't
time.
even know who's DC.
I could tell.
Let me do some tests with you.
No, please don't. My head will explode. Marvel.
You don't like DC?
No, I love Marvel and
But
DC.
you want me to stop mixing them?
Right. That's
Okay.
nails against chalkboard.
Wonder Woman.
DC.
You know, I only like the women superheroes. Catwoman.
DC.
Hello. Okay.
Storm.
All right, we're coming
Marvel.
back from our turn and talk, which was to talk about how you think the portrayal of the Dora Milaje and any other female characters from the Priest novels, how they might have been different in the Coates novel that we read. And then also if there's any comments about like the way that Black Panther writes as female, or Priest and Coates writes the female characters compared to any other Marvel comic books or movies. Any thoughts?
Okay, also just not knowing if this is just a when they were written difference versus author choice. But it seems like the ones from 98 are like you have a role. And this is what you do, and you're kind of just like Mr. Smith from The Matrix, and you just do your role and that's it. Where later on, they have multiple roles and we see a lot more of them, and they're having their own opinions and their own stories. So they seem to be less like, you are female that does this, and to you are females that do all these things. And actually, we're just kind of like watching the Black Panther movie up on the screen and talking about how it's really nice that they have a strong female influence in different positions. So it's not like, oh, we just have some kick-ass female warriors. It's like, no, they can be diplomats, they can be warriors, they can be leading, they can be doing this, they can be doing that. So just the expansion of the different roles they can play. And also having different personalities instead of just like you are this group, this is the group and these are the individuals in this group and kind of their more elaborate stories, and how that's kind of happened in Marvel in general. So we were joking like Black Widow, when you first meet her, she's like the candy for Tony Stark, and later on she gets her full story. And just any of these female characters that go from you are this thing to like, oh, you are a person with multiple levels, and even the side characters about that. So we joked about like Pepper, she goes from just kind of like the person who has to deal with Tony to like, hey, she actually leads his entire business. That's kind of cool. So going from, again, like, hey, here's our token female, and she does this thing, or this is our token group of females, see, women power over here, to this is a group of females, they do multiple things, they choose to do multiple things, there are multiple levels, there's multiple ages, all that. So showing more diversity within the female group.
Mari,
Did I
you
pass
see
that
no
one?
Oh, no, I was going to go let you go
I
first.
don't know. That's all you, Mari.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, man, I don't even know where to begin for all this. So there's a lot to cover. You covered a lot of ground. So I think, so if I start like just looking at the movies, for example, I look at the history of the movies. And I remember, a lot of time as the Marvel different phases were starting to roll out, you heard the movie companies go, well, we can't have a female-led movie, right? That a female-led movie can't stand. And yet Marvel's like, yeah, a female-led movie can't stand, but we're gonna have a movie with a talking raccoon. That should work. So that argument has always been kind of like is that really the case? And so when you got me all these points. So yes, so following the different story arcs of a lot of the women in the Marvel universe, you mentioned Pepper. What I found fascinating was Jane Foster's arc in Thor, where I don't even know if she rises to the occasion of arm candy in the Thor movies at first, but then she gets a full rounded arc in Love and Thunder. Love and Thunder? Yes.
Love and Thunder.
So again, so we see this, and I think evolution is going to be the word that's going to be the running theme for all these comics. You see the evolution of how women get portrayed, even in the cinematic universe, going, wait a second, women are kind of like people. And so they deserve whole character arcs and fleshed out characters. And so you're seeing that a lot more in the movies. Now, then when I look at the Christopher Priest run in the actual graphic novel, yeah, the Dora Milaje were problematic. They were cool creations, but kind of problematic. So I wrote that short story, right, for Black Panther. So I tell the short story through the eyes of this character. Her name's Queen Divine Justice, who is a character that gets introduced by Priest in the run after the one that we read. And she turns out she's of the line of the Dora Milaje, but she's a high school teenager in Chicago. So they go grab her, bring her back to Wakanda. So I told the whole story through her eyes. The note I got back from Marvel, even though I stuck to Christopher Priest's run, were like, yeah, the Dora Milaje as presented during that run was problematic. We are going to back away from that and pretend that didn't happen, lean more towards how they were presented later on. Right? So it's like, okay, so again, that falls into the category of, I guess that run, what we read didn't happen. But again, like you were saying, it was a product of the times, and it was written for the male gaze because they were written for Marvel fanboys, and that's how they were designed. But again, we talk about that whole idea of continual revolution. As we look at them now and look at the outfits that Ruth Carter designed for this movie, you see that, oh no, the Dora Milaje are wearing practical combat outfits, right? So again, I love the idea that this is all a matter of continual evolution and frankly, just learning to just do better.
Yeah, I think that, speaking of the movies, I think that the way that all of the female characters were portrayed and styled, I guess, is so much better than any of the other movies. And they have so many, I guess, full-fleshed, female characters that have actual story arcs that are their own within the entire story of the Black Panther. That it seems novel, but it turns out it's from years and years of comic books kind of going through that evolution of who the Dora Milaje are, or what they stand for, what the other female characters stand for.
I think even thinking about the movie, in that second one, you even saw more of an evolution of the female characters without giving too much away, thinking about Shuri and when she took the herb of the jammy. And then we all thought she was going to see her mama.
Please don't lose me with your technical language.
And, all of a sudden she became even a little dark because of something that happened to her. And they now have this full dimension where if you think about it in the first movie, they're all just kind of happy. The one thing I didn't remember, because, I always have a question for you, is in the first one, the head of the Dora Milaje kills her husband.
Doesn't kill him.
So where is he?
Oh,
In
in
the second one?
filming Nope.
What?
He's filming Nope at the time. The actor who's playing him is actually filming Nope, the movie Nope.
Oh, that's why,
Yeah.
because I thought they said it,
But their in movie explanation
he
is
died, or she
no,
killed her.
no, because remember the mother says you can still see your husband.
Oh.
So I don't know if he's in exile or something like that, because like you can still see him.
Because he raised arms against them, so he's in. Okay, I got it. So, but yeah, so that's what I was saying, is you saw more of even a dimension of that in the second one. She makes a mistake. She's not this super warrior all the time, and because of that, she gets. Oh, see, I'm trying not to give spoilers,
Right.
but okay.
She has an arc.
She has more of an arc than she did in the first one. She wasn't just fighting in the second one. Yes. Yep. And that movie where they all come together and fight the man with the rings.
We'll all seen that one, I think.
Avengers.
No
Is
spoilers.
that what it's called? Oh, okay. You know what, the rings and he snaps. Okay.
All right.
You're doing this on purpose.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts for that question, or any other questions? Okay. So I have a question for you guys. Again, sort of keeping in line with the evolution, I want to sort of talk about the science now, because I think that even the way that the science was portrayed was different between the priests and the codes, right? And so, one, how do you think it's different? How do you think it's evolved over that time that these two authors wrote these novels? And I guess, Maurice, this would be partially for you, because I don't know what happens in the middle between the time that Christopher Priest stops writing and Ta-Nehisi Coates takes over. What was the evolution then that led to the differences in the science that we see?
Well, so when Christopher Priest started writing his run, he wanted to really emphasize that Wakanda is technologically advanced. And so that's even going to impact the Black Panther's costume. So that's why you see the emphasis on his the energy dagger and the Kimoyo card and his claws and the soul and the vibranium lining the soles of his boots and woven with costume, because it's a powerful element with a lot of properties and they're just saying, hey, here's all the different ways this you can be useful, just even in the costuming are King and Black Panther. So that was a very intentional choice on Christopher Priest's part. And I think part of it is just a matter of artistic choice, for each writer, what are they going to choose to emphasize? So in the Ta-Nehisi Coates run, there was an intentional moving away from some of the ornate elements of Black Panther's costume from the Christopher Priest run. They said, we want to go for a more simplified look, a sleeker look. And so one of the things I noticed about it was, even though the design was simpler, you see the technology actually woven more into things in a natural way. It's like almost casually, like there's just like casual electronics just as decoration, like even there, what looks like just tattoos, full well that's, vibranium tech woven into, or used as ink or used as design on them. So yeah, it's like we're going to both take a step back and yet deepen it in the same way. So, and my takeaway from the Ta-Nehisi Coates run is like, now how is culture impacted by technology, and what does that look like? What are the cultural impacts on technology, and how it's used, how it's presented?
Yeah, because he also, in the Codes, there's also a lot of talk about philosophy and why that's important. There's a section about the beginning of life, where it talks about from the point of view of a tree, I think. And it kind of blends that into the science. And it's not just about, here's science, here's how we are advanced, and this is what we can do with it, but also what are our obligations with the science? What are we ethically supposed to be doing with the technology that we have? Carlotta, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think, in my opinion, and like I said, this is more from the movies than the books, because I leave the book stuff to him. It feels like to me that they're using it mostly to advance their society and protect themselves, right? And so there's this value system that I think they wrap the vibranium in that they're not sure other people would do. Like Claw, thinking about it, or even Killmonger, for that matter. And the fact at the end of the first movie, he's just like, they're like, we're giving you a chance. You can, nope, I'm not right. I just need to go. Like, if you keep me as the Black Panther, I'm going to use vibranium, but I'm not going to use it in a good way. So they wrap their morality almost around this technology, and that if we've been blessed with this, then we have to be trusted that we're going to do right by it. And I think that also goes back to that speech I said Angela Bassett gives at the beginning of the second one as well. Like, I know you're asking nicely, but I'm saying no nicely, because I don't trust you or your moral compass and what you'll do with it.
Well, how much do you think it's also about Wakanda's cultural priorities? Because when I was watching, especially in the first movie,
Yeah.
You see that it's like, no, technology is actually a highly valued as a cultural element also.
Yes.
And it's going to be one of our cultural priorities, which is why, and what's the impact of that? Well, now you see its impact on, hey, this is what our school system now looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, it trickles all the way down to how they even run their education. So.
Yeah, and the fact, like I said, the young lady from MIT, no spoiler alert, but also it's like she needs to come back here with us because there's some things that she can do to even help us advance it even further than where we are, right?
Yeah.
You don't like when I call it the Iron Man suit, though. Like,
No, you're
like,
fine.
They didn't have nothing like the Iron Man suit. Is that DC?
You're good.
Oh,
No,
is that good? Okay.
you're doing so well.
Yeah, but you be rolling your eyes at me sometimes. But yeah, I just think that value system, and even that it's valued for young people and understanding that. You're right. And they're groomed to do that. So that even if Shuri's not the engineer anymore, it's like, oh my God, who's going to do it now? Because they've now groomed other people behind her to do the same. The one thing I found also interesting is you don't really see the male characters doing technology, right? So they've now flipped it the whole other way. I was like, I want the women to join in, but they've actually just been like, nope, they just don't do it. The women take care of that stuff, which I also find very cool.
Yeah, that was very cool. So piggybacking off of that. Yes, go ahead.
I might actually be answering your next question, but it also points to, again, talking about cultural values, and I think you were talking about the different roles women then occupy as, not just scientists, but also as diplomats. Queen Ramonda, as the Queen Mother, it's like, oh, we're now pointing to the whole, hey, you know what, matriarchies are important in this culture, especially as part of the ruling class. And so you just see these different roles of women that's just woven naturally through the movie without making a big deal out of it. It's just like, no, this is just how it is. So they don't point a finger at it, it's just, hey.
This is what women do every single day, right? Everywhere. Yeah, so my question to you, Carlotta, because I want to talk about the novel, but I also want to understand what it means to people in real life. And when we're talking about science and technology and the ethics behind it, there is, you would know more about this, but there is a lot of ethical concerns. There are a lot of ethical concerns about how we use technology, what we can do with it, especially today, and where it's going. Right. So do you think that there are things from the novels, the movies, anything you've gleaned from that world that you think applies to how we approach our technology?
So I give talks on this a lot, and actually thinking about what I normally recommend when I give talks about it, Black Panther actually would not work because I really push for diversity in engineering and on teams in order to address those issues with bias and ethics. And typically that happens because you have a team that is not represented with men and women, people from different cultures, people from different ethnicities and races. And you give examples like Alexa doesn't understand female voices, or Alexa doesn't understand people with accents. And the only way to address some of those ethical concerns is to have these diverse teams. So if that's really true, then at some point, Wakanda would have to open up the gates and let other people in as well, so that when they're designing these technologies, we're making sure that they don't just work for Wakanda, right? But I always, when I say that, I'm saying if you're designing something that's supposed to be for the global world, then you have to have a global perspective on your engineering teams. So the caveat to that is if they're designing technology just for their community, do they really need diverse teams? That's the question you have to ask.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. That was a question within my question. All right, great. So I'm just going to check the time real quick. All right, we're good. Okay, so this is a general question, and I'm asking this because I think everyone has probably seen at least one Black Panther movie now. How well do you think the movies have adapted the comic books?
That's what my
And
students used to
without,
do.
ideally without spoilers, but, you know, I think everyone has seen the first movie, so. And if they haven't, this is a book discussion, so it's fine.
All right. So I always, yes, I'm a fanboy nerd. That is clearly on the record at this point. But whenever I go see any sort of translation from one media to another, I try to treat them as two separate things. So my thing is it true to the spirit of it? Not is it a word for word translation to it, but is it true to the spirit? So my go-to example for example is the movie Watchmen. Watchmen, the comic book, which is a DC comic book.
And I saw Watchmen.
Okay, thank you. But Watchmen is widely hailed as the greatest comic book ever written,
Okay.
right? But if you watch the Watchmen movie, while it's true, while it gives you the story, you have no real idea. Well, wait, that just seems like a typical comic book story. Why is this the greatest comic book ever written? Well, that's because we're talking about two different media. As a comic book, it is doing all sorts of revolutionary things in terms of storytelling. In the movie, it's just telling a movie. It's just telling the story. So is it? So does it work does it work? Yeah, it does. But then you take the Watchmen TV series. Well, while it's in the same universe, it is a great use of TV as a media to tell the story of Watchmen. So I keep those sort of examples in mind when I'm like, okay, trying to compare the book to the media of choice. All that to go. So when I watch Black Panther, it's like Professor Nerd. Let's just keep going. I think it's absolutely true to the spirit of the comic books, but part of doing that, it requires a reimagining along the way. Because, for example, as we've been talking about, like the Dora Milaje, how their costuming, and in fact, the costuming of all of Wakanda gets reimagined for the big screen, and that's a beautiful reimagining. When we think of in the sequel, the current movie, the whole history of Namor, for example, is completely reimagined. Is it true to the comic books? Not even a little bit. I mean, he's a guy who's a mutant who is from underwater. That's pretty much and he has wings on his feet. Those are all still there, but his whole backstory has been completely reimagined. That works perfectly in this universe, and frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that worked so good. We're gonna the Namor you knew, we're gonna kind of back away from and start leading into this new retelling of Namor because it was such a great job in terms of world building and reimagining this character to make him distinct from other characters and other superhero mythologies. For example, people would confuse him with Aquaman, who was a DC character.
I know you keep doing that on purpose.
But that was like one of the big reasons was because there was going to be that confusion.
Yeah.
So
And I was going to say, I didn't totally read them, but the little bit I did saw, I went to go see the second one on Friday just to do it for this because that was how I studied. That was my Cliff Notes.
Right.
And then when I left, my husband's like, that wasn't even close to the book. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't know. And then when I came home and looked at the books right after the movie and immediately started seeing some things like Namor and things like, I'm like, some of this is in there. What do you mean it's not close to the book? I wouldn't expect it to be exact, but actually some of the stuff does show up in the book, maybe
Right.
just in a different form.
Right.
Even though Namor really did kind of confuse me at first. Because I was like, I thought Vibranium was only in Wakanda. Who is this? Who's this Waterman? But yeah, that's a whole, oh, look at me giving
this Waterman?
spoilers, sorry. But
Sorry, that's my new favorite line. Who does Waterman?
Yeah, I think that the movies were the first introduction for a lot of people to Black Panther.
Absolutely.
It was mine. Because I haven't read the comic books until this month.
Yeah.
So for
and I
me,
was like, I never heard of Wakanda. Where is that at? Right?
yeah, I think
Thought it was real.
it's also important because you have, like you mentioned, having Everett Ross be a white man narrator, because you need that to appeal to people who would come buy the comic books. Just like that, your movie has to be appealing to a wide mass of people who are going to come watch it.
Yeah.
So stylistically, I guess there would be differences, but I do think they did a great job with the movies and the way that they portrayed the characters.
One thing that I had heard, I'm not sure how true it is, but I know you will correct me, is that they had started filming the second one with Chad and then he passed away. And so they had to modify it.
No.
Is that not true?
No.
See, I knew you would correct me.
Yeah, because he passed away so suddenly, I mean, they had
They had the script written,
they had
and they had to
everything,
change it.
a whole
Right,
lot of
right.
modifications.
Right.
Because he kept his illness so secret, like none of them even knew or even suspected.
Right.
So his passing was a surprise to all of them also. And so, yeah, and so at that point, the script had been done, or the ideas for what was going to happen had all been mapped out. And it's like, oh, yeah, we can't do this.
And I think without spoiling alert, so there's something that happens in the second one, and before that happened, because after he died, it was like, well, who's going to be the Black Panther? Who's going to be the Black Panther? And I remember having this discussion with my friends, and like, oh, that's totally unrealistic, right? Because one of the things with my husband is that he won't see any movies if there's just too many female characters. He's just like, oh, this doesn't feel realistic. This would never happen, thinking like The Woman King, which you wouldn't go see with me. And so then when these things happen in the second movie, I'm like, but that's actually in the book, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not as far-fetched as you think it is. It's just people don't expect it.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Let me stay on task.
Right.
Okay, so I was
But
actually.
yes, to everything you just said.
Yeah.
I was actually going to open up the floor for some questions from people if they had for experts. You can ask anything. I think they will be able to answer. Are there any questions?
Admittedly, not a comic book nerd. So I'm kind of curious, actually, for both of you, of if we're going to do I know Marvel and DC are the big ones, but there's other groups. Who do you think, one, is the best representative for technology, and then also females, and also people of color? If you have your favorites for those different representations.
Well, you already know I don't know the difference between DC and Marvel, but I can tell you who I like.
You do. Yeah,
You just yelled me about that. You know I don't know.
Well, so
But I
for
will
you
tell
to
you
say,
who I
like,
like.
what's your favorite movie or comic book for each of those
Can I
things,
tell you
then?
my favorite characters and you tell me if they're DC or Marvel?
Well, that's him. I don't do that, yeah.
I'll let you know.
Wonder Woman, love Wonder Woman.
DC,
Storm,
Marvel,
Catwoman.
DC.
I don't know no more women. That's it. I ain't got nobody else. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's
All right, your turn.
So my favorite characters in terms of technology. Women,
Oh, Iron Man for the technology, not Iron Man. What's the man with the suit? Stark somebody.
Tony Stark.
Yeah, that's the technology one.
Who-
DC or Marvel?
He's Marvel.
Oh,
He
okay.
is Iron Man.
Oh, well, you know what I'm saying. I like him.
For a lot of, like for me, I mean, like I go way back with Black Panther. So in terms of like technology and POC representation, for me, it's going to go back to Black Panther. Secondary, with the caveat being over at DC, there are two of my favorite characters over there: Cyborg from the Teen Titans, and then this little known character known as Mr. Terrific, who's always been like a quiet favorite character of mine. Women representation. Ooh, this is yes.
I got another one,
Okay, go with your.
but I've only seen it on TV. I don't even know if it's real.
Okay.
Jessica Jones,
Yes.
DC or Marvel?
She is Marvel.
Marvel. Yeah, I like Jessica too.
I do too.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
Moon Girl?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try that one. I don't know.
Yes,
Moon
because
Girl.
she is. I believe they've said that she is in the either her or Riri, or maybe both, are now in the top 10 of the top intellects in the Marvel universe.
Well,
so-
Riri, you know I love now. That's not.
Right.
She's jumped Shuri as my favorite now.
Oh, okay.
So I got to try Moon Girl.
Right. Yeah. I'm going
I
through
should've
my
said Riri
Rolodex
when you
of
asked. What was
favorite
I
characters.
thinking?
I'll keep it easy and just go with Storm as my. Yeah, I have a friend who has an academic book on Storm coming out next year.
What about the Doctor? Yeah, I like her too.
Who?
On X-Men, Doctor.
Oh, Jean Grey.
Yeah. I forgot about.
I have opinions, but
Oh, so you don't like her?
I have opinions.
Okay, never mind. Maybe you don't like Doctor.
All right, we got another question.
I guess my question is separating actor from role, I guess. So I went into Black Panther 2 and I couldn't separate Shuri, the actor, or the actor playing Shuri from the character. And it starts off with her working.
What?
So it starts off with her working to save her brother, knowing in the real world she's had what I would consider some problematic views on modern science.
And what?
Modern science. So, yeah, because she's basically working on a vaccine to save her brother while
she's anti-vax.
she's anti.
Yes.
So what surprised me was I had read she wasn't going to be in it because of that. And then she was. So the thing I kept thinking as I'm watching this, did she take the vaccine? Why is she here? Like, did she end up doing it? Or did they just give her a pass? Because that's what was confusing me, because they made it seem like she wasn't going to be in it.
It's a question for
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, we need to Google that.
And so it kind of took me out of the movie from the
Yeah,
start to
that's
be
good.
like, oh, I can't,
Yeah.
like, my brain wasn't like, oh, actress believes one thing, character believes another, and just, I didn't know if that
Yeah.
struck either of you or not.
I got over it pretty early on. I mean, I chuckled, like, as you just saw, I chuckled when I saw her in the lab trying to fix a vaccine. And then after that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to let that go. It's like, because I'm in the first 5 minutes, and this movie's 3 hours long. So it's going to be a long time for me to hold a grudge. So,
And to be honest, and I maybe shouldn't say this, I don't know if I would have cared too much if they swapped out Shuri. I was excited, black female engineer, but if Shuri showed up with a different face, I don't know if I would have really cared that much. You know, she was all right, you know.
I did really like her character because I think she was like they show her in the lab in the first movie, right, doing all these things,
Which I loved,
and she was
yeah.
kind of the mastermind of her brother's weapons and the tools and the suit and everything he wears. She's sort of like the person doing it all, which I thought was really cool. And so, yeah, I think her character meant a lot more than the actor playing it. So if they had
Correct.
switched it out, I think it would have still meant a lot.
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
Which
her
is-
arc in the second one goes some places that are not always likable. That's all I'll say, but you know.
Yeah, which is interesting because that was actually the argument against recasting Black Panther, is because we couldn't separate the actor from the character.
Yeah.
So there
yeah.
are certain, it's like, we had no problems when they switched out who was playing War Machine, the second Iron Man character. We had no problem when Terrence Howard got swapped out for Don Cheadle. We didn't blink twice. But with Chadwick Boseman character, it's like, no, he is so indelibly Black Panther, there is no swapping him out.
All right, so I guess, I don't know if this is a weird question, but just thinking of that, the graphic novels, I mean, even they kind of, physically, they're different. The characters look different in that, and Black Panther looked very different in the Priest novel and versus the Coates. And like I think if you can get used to that, which I think in comic books it's common when you have illustrators kind of going through and having their own take on what the character looks like. If it looks different in comic books, can be read as such as like, yeah, this is Black Panther now. Then why can't you do it, in a movie? Change out the actor.
Let's see how I answer this.
Sorry,
All right,
sorry.
So, I mean, yes, there's and like I said, I hear all these arguments a lot, because people are like, well, more than one person played Superman, or more than one person played Spider-Man or Batman, and I get that. But if they rebooted the whole franchise, then yeah, I wouldn't have blinked twice if they just rebooted the whole thing. But one of my reads on the sequel movie was this was probably the most human movie the Marvel Universe has produced. Because you have this group of people. I mean, Ryan Coogler and Chadwick Boseman go way back. They were friends. And so I mean, while we casually talk about, hey, let's recast, it's like, yeah, but I can't recast my friend. My friend occupied a certain amount of
Right.
space in my world. And so recasting him is just gonna be hard. And the idea is just sort of anathema to me. So like even with all right, so one, and here's basically how I tie this together. So in my book, Sweep of Stars, when I was writing it, my father had passed not too long before I wrote it. And so even though I thought I was well past the grieving process, I noticed that grief becomes a theme in the novel just because as a creative, I'm still processing what's going on inside of me. And I'm pretty sure that's what's going on with, as Ryan Coogler is writing this movie, he's still processing the loss of his friend. And so then the movie takes on this sort of communal process
Yeah.
of, no, what does it look like for us to grieve in community, which I've not seen done in a movie before. It's like, no, this isn't just a movie. We're going to grieve together and walk through this together. And so the idea of trying to, so yeah, so there's a lot of needles this movie has to thread in terms of we're not going to recast him. We're still going to have, there's a spoiler, but I mean, there's still legacy to be had. We're going to advance the Shuri storyline. We're going to move it up sooner because she does become Black Panther in the comic books. So how do we juggle all these things as a Marvel movie? And I think it does as great a job as one movie can do in juggling all those things.
And they have to do it without being too dark. Before I went to go see the movie, like I tweet about everything, and people were like, well, you need, because my brother just passed away. They're like, oh, no, you need to take some tissue because you're going to cry. I'm like, I don't want to go see no movie when I'm trying to immerse myself in something to get away if it's going to be sad and make me cry. So they did have to thread that needle. And a little bit of the book I've seen, and maybe this is the thing comic books do, both of those books seem way darker to me than the movies. And I don't know if it just seems that way, but it's going to make me not want to enjoy it. He's saying, no, not really. But like even the way the Black Panther looks, I want happy. I want my time away from my job to be happy.
The Christopher Priest run does a really good job of balancing just some really just near farcical ideas. In fact, there's a whole storyline with the happy Black Panther that is just so ridiculous and over the top that I'm just like, I am here for every last bit of this. Even though, it does a really good job of injecting humor into it. So it's balancing, we have all these humorous elements, but we also have this enigmatic figure at the heart of all of this. So it's kind of like how do you do a bunch of jokes around Batman? It's kind of a feel to it. So
I think that technology question, Batman should probably be on that list.
Batman is, Reed Richards probably should top the list, but I'm just going through my list. See, this is the problem with those kind of questions. Like, I'm literally in the back of my head, I'm still going through my Rolodex of who would be the top intellect that I would, so. Lex Luthor.
That was all
Sorry.
very well put. I just want to say, I haven't approached it in that way at all. And I think when you make a movie, and clearly they have so many people working on the movie, so many creatives, so many diverse voices, and they've made an effort to do that for the movies, which I think is very important. But also, it becomes more about what they're also trying to say and what they want to put out there into the world, and not just having to do with what the viewers would want to see.
Yeah. I have a
So-
Maurice question.
Just sitting here minding my own business.
Oh, okay.
So they, I think this is referring to movies, but, oh yeah. So the question is, the ability of T'Challa's suit to absorb energy and then put it back out, do we have anything like that in technology today, or, analogous to that?
Well, on a very, very elementary level, capacitors, right? That's something that stores energy and then releases it later into the space. So it may not be on the level of what the suit does, yes, but yeah, capacitors. Inductors, right? Both of those store energy that then later on is released. So then you have that potential energy that's stored up, and then you have to close a circuit or something somehow without me not getting too engineering on you to release it. So yes, absolutely, something like that exists. But my question for Maurice was, which one did you like better, Wakanda Forever or Black Panther?
Ooh. I would need to see Wakanda Forever again before I could make that judgment.
I thought you said you saw it 3 times.
No. I saw the first one 3 times in the
The
theater.
first one 3 times.
And
Okay.
probably another 4 or 5 times at home.
Okay, never mind.
Right. And I've only seen Wakanda Forever once, so.
All right, do we have other questions from the audience? All right, I have one last question, and this is maybe too controversial, but we'll talk about it anyway. We can keep it brief, but what do you think about the amount of money and funding that we put into making the Marvel movies, and the amount of CGI and technology that we use, and how it's kind of become this cornerstone of American culture? Marvel movies, I think, popular across the entire world. What do you think about that?
I'm okay with CGI, like you think about, what's the dinosaur movie, Jurassic Park and all that, as long as people understand that it's not real. I think my concern becomes when there starts to blur these lines between, I don't know if this is really happening or not. I'll give you an example. I'm really into robotics ethics, and I recently saw this thing on TikTok where they had put a gun on a robot and it was shooting other robots. And I'm just fussing all in the comments, like, we don't do this. They're like, you do know that CGI and it's fake. No, I didn't know it was fake, and you got me over here being mad about something that's not even real. So I think if you're gonna do stuff like that, maybe not in the movies, but you need to put something, this is fake, this was computer generated, because I'm over here cussing people out about, we don't give robots guns ever. Have you never heard of Asimov's laws? So I think if we're gonna do stuff like that, we have to kind of make it real. And like I just said about my students, they see this technology, then they come and see my little janky robot on the floor, and they're like, why this ain't doing what I saw in that movie? Because that thing in the movie ain't doing what you saw it doing. Somebody recently asked me about the new Tesla robot. Don't put this on Twitter. And they were like asking me what I thought about the new Tesla humanoid robot. I think it's Optimum that's coming out next year. And I said, I like the Boston Dynamics parkour robot better. Sorry. Right? But at least I know that's real, right? There's actually a robot that can do that. So I don't like your robot is a man in a suit, or that your robot basically waters plants. Make your robot go jump around from box to box and dance and do, coordinated routines with DigiDog, and then come back to see me. That's my mommy. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm done.
Oh, no, you're good, you're good. When I think about technology, so like with my sci-fi book, right? I originally planned that to take place 1,000 years from now.
Cool.
But as I was trying to imagine technology, I realized I have a limit on how much technology I can imagine. And everything I was imagining, I was just like, I bet this is actually going to be within 100 years, not the 1,000 I'm thinking it's going to take to get to this point. So I had to like redo my entire timeline to go, all right, this novel now takes place 100 years from now because of how technology is advancing and that sort of thing.
I was going to say, one of the jokes I always get is in Back to the Future. Remember, he's trying to fix the car, and everybody, I can't remember what it's called, the something gigawatt capacitor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, flux capacitor. So everybody always wants to hear about that. I'm like, baby, I don't know nothing about that.
Right.
It's a coffee maker. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, you're
Yeah.
good, you're good. And so, I mean, as a creative, I don't mind people pumping a lot of money into something.
Yeah.
Just real talk. And frankly, as someone who's grown up with comic, I mean, I picked up my first comic book in 5th grade, and so right now I'm like living the golden age of me as a comic book nerd. And so I'm like, yeah, whatever you got to do to make this as real looking as possible, I'm good with. But that being said, I think one of the things I love so much about science fiction and comic books is this whole idea of like creating these worlds that are aspirational, creating these creating these vehicles where we can just wonder what possible futures could look like, and how, and asking questions that we can then take back and ask among ourselves. Like, I remember one of the questions I was asking myself was like, what is the role of AI in community? What are the ethics surrounding that? The fact that the Marvel actually employs scientists consultants